Well, welcome everyone into WCATV Studio B. I'm Dan Hogan and very delighted to be joined here by Veteran Services Officer Patrick George. Patrick, thanks so much for being here again. Glad to have you in Studio B for the first time.
Thanks, Dan.
So calendar just flipped to November. Busy time for veterans organizations, and I'm sure the Veterans Department in the city of Watertown. So we have a few things that we want to talk about in this interview, but I wanted to lead off and give you a chance to talk about how you and other veterans in the community will be celebrating Veterans Day. So what can you tell us about Veterans Day celebration plans here in Watertown?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. So we're going to continue our tradition and have our annual Veterans Day breakfast, which is at the Shutt Detachment. The Shutt Detachment is 215 Mount Auburn Street in Watertown. Just look for the cannons. You can't really miss it. We always have our breakfast at 11 a.m. that day. We have a brief moment of silence at 11:11. And then we just, a lot of folks will stick around and kind of share war stories and talk to some of the veterans that they maybe haven't seen since last Veterans Day. And so it's really a good time for the individuals. And, I know that the veterans also appreciate when, we have members of the city staff that show up, members of the city council that show up and kind of talk about how obviously the veterans' efforts have been appreciated, not just when they were in the military, but as members of the community now, as they have been. A lot of the folks there have been members of the community for years. And so they're just staples in the community, not just because they're veterans, but they also happen to be veterans that are there. So
that's November 11th at 11.
Yep.
11:11.
Yep.
Easy to remember.
Exactly.
Who makes the breakfast?
So the cuisine's being run by the folks in the Shutt Detachment. Ed O'Coin is usually the master of ceremonies in the kitchen. It's just worked out that way for as long as I can remember.
So from there's some other veterans related things happening in the month of November, specifically in cooperation with the library. So people are going to be able to actually find a list of books and reading materials kind of centered around veterans. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've, again, thanks to the library for being such a valuable partner, but we're going to have a digital reading list this year that's really going to focus not just on a veteran. This isn't going to be a book that a veteran has to read. It's going to be a book or books, plural. I think we have 10 that are going to be sort of family-friendly across the spectrum, from age to type of service to, whether it's for a spouse or a veteran or a family or sort of all of the above. Just to kind of talk about the lived experience just of, not just of veterans, but what happened in service, what happened following their military service, sort of reintegrating back into society. And so we're excited to have that ready to go. We're hoping it's going to be successful, and, we're hoping we hear good things and, give people some perspective if they haven't served to kind of get an idea of what military service was like. And so we're excited for that.
Do you have any examples of the types of books that people will be able to find there?
Yeah, so we've got at least one that talks about, and actually a colleague of mine, his service dog, Mocha. We've got a couple books that I read, not just, required for me when I was in the military. One of them being a book called The Ugly American, which is, it was fiction, but it talks about just sort of the role of the military and sort of this nation building aspect and sort of how to be good diplomats as a military service member. And then there's a couple books that were, prescribed in college, and some were, required by colleagues. One was called Thank You for Your Service, that talks about sort of the veterans coming back. And again, it covers the whole spectrum, but it was from, several other reading lists. We're not the first community to put together a reading list with the library, in our community. So we're able to sort of leverage and steal good ideas from our neighboring communities as well.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And then sticking with the library, on November 6th, there's another important event coming up. Can you talk a little bit about that? Something that stemmed from the Health and Human Services study that was recently conducted by the city.
Yeah. So in Watertown, we have roughly 36,000 residents in the city, and according to census data, I think of those 36,000, they think probably about 1,200 to 1,300 are veterans. And so ideally, we're looking at finding a needle in a haystack when it comes to identifying a veteran that may need services in Watertown. And so this is an effort to sort of cast as wide a net as possible and make my office sort of expand into some of the other service providers in the community. And really what this is going to do is it's going to empower them to know a little bit more about veterans benefits. And not that I'm expecting them to do my job for me, but I think when you have a resident or you have someone in need or a family member that is looking at options for different benefits for a loved one or for themselves, or, someone that they may know, I think the confidence in any person that they speak to say, okay, well, the VSO in my community taught me that if you are a Vietnam era veteran if you're a Vietnam veteran and you have diabetes, for example, those two circumstances make you eligible for certain VA benefits, no questions asked. It just goes through, it's a paperwork process to apply for those benefits. Same thing with a veteran who served in Iraq or Afghanistan because of exposure to burn pits. If they have asthma, that is something that the VA concedes, and it's just a matter of applying for those benefits. And again, I'm not expecting other stakeholders to do those applications, but them having a general understanding of some type of circumstances that, he told, I learned from the VSO that A plus B equals C. And then that gives that veteran or that family member a little bit more confidence to call me and say, I heard from this person. This is what they told me. This is the outreach that you did to them. And it allows me to have a more meaningful conversation with that person versus having to screen them for X, Y, and Z because they Googled the veteran benefit and the first thing that came up was, the best veterans benefits that they may not be eligible for. But again, we have to sort of have that conversation and drill down to what specifically somebody's eligible for.
So is this something that people have to call you and register to attend, or is it November 6th at 3:30 at the library? Just come and we'll be...
Yeah, so I created a Google registration form only because the room that we're in does have a capacity of about 25 people. It would be a good problem to have for us to exceed capacity. I'm not entirely sure it's going to get there. But as we've sort of explained, I'm hoping that this is really only for providers, right? So case managers, we've invited some of the folks from some of our medical offices in the community, Springwell, some of the people that we work with regularly, Wayside, the Council on Aging, the Housing Authority, and the police department. I have had individuals from some of the assisted living and independent living facilities around ask if they can bring veterans. I'm asking to hold off on that for now, only because I think I could have a more meaningful conversation at a specific facility about the specific options for those individuals, more in a more detailed fashion. But the presentation I put together and the sort of the conversations that I'm hoping to have next Wednesday are really about just the providers and how to ask, for them to be equipped to ask the right questions to at least sort of get down the road of whether or not someone might be eligible for certain benefits.
So if anyone watching this knows any providers, you're really encouraging them to share this with them in hopes that you get as many as you can get up.
Yeah, definitely. They can shoot me an email. And again, the fact that they haven't registered on the Google form I created isn't going to be the end of the world. Nobody's checking tickets at the door or anything like that. Just in the interest of, the time and the, respect for the facility. We obviously are going to be in a library. And so I don't want it spilling over and me having to project my voice when people are trying to do, things that you normally do in a library. And yeah, so this was inspired a little bit by the Health and Human Services study where it talked about sort of leveraging partnerships across the community and across the spectrum to really, to ensure that someone who's eligible for benefits, not just veterans benefits, but just healthcare benefits, social services benefits, casting as wide a net as possible ensures that nothing gets missed. And so this is an initial effort on my end to sort of invite everybody that's related to the social services, medical service providers as well, that have social work teams now and, the wraparound services that come with primary care, and just kind of get them all equipped to know what benefits exist. Because you can be a veteran that really likes your primary care at a medical facility in Watertown, and just because you're collecting VA benefits does not mean you have to go use a VA hospital. And so it's just, equipping the veteran, equipping the stakeholders, and equipping everybody really with as much information as possible to allow them to make educated decisions on their health and their, well-being.
Mm-hmm. So you said that based on Watertown's population, there should be, between 12 and 1,300 veterans in the community?
Yep.
How many of those do you think that you, over the course of the year, interact with or talk to in any capacity, whether it be them coming to you for help or you just seeing them in the community at various events?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly isn't anywhere close to that number. I see the veterans and the veterans organizations that we have in the community, which is the VFW and the Shut Detachment, as well as the MVets Post. Certainly hear from family members on occasion asking about veterans benefits as well. It really depends on the month. Leading into Veterans Day, leading into Memorial Day, you hear from a lot more who've, maybe a veteran has a family member or a friend, unfortunately, at one of our cemeteries and want to make sure they get a flag, those kinds of things. Especially when it's nicer out leading into Memorial Day, we certainly get a lot of people out that we haven't seen in a while. The schools are usually are good in terms of getting people invited, and I know a lot of our veterans are excited when those invites goes out. It is really tough to say, but I can certainly say, we haven't scratched the surface of the amount of veterans we have to reach. We have done our best to sort of improve outreach. What I can say is, we recently had we get our veteran census list from the city clerk's office, which is something, certainly private, shared with the clerk's office and my office. And we've been doing some outreach from there, getting some general veterans benefits information out. Thankfully, through a grant a couple of years ago, I was able to get a veterans benefits guide brochure published or, produced that has as much, sort of cast a wide net as possible, very general information, but, as much as I can fit in a three-paned brochure. And so we sent about 200 of those out. And I know I heard from a bunch of folks who had general questions because of that, related to VA claims and everything else. So it's, veterans are across the spectrum. Veterans are across the spectrum in terms of age, from someone who just entered the service at 18 to someone who's been retired to someone who got out, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so reaching a veteran is just as difficult as it is to reach the general public in terms of how they consume information, how they receive information. And so, our brochures are a great way to reach out to people. Social media is a great way to reach out to people. And of course, cable access is a great way to reach out to people too. Just to do our best to, reach them in any capacity. And if I get 2 phone calls from this interview saying, "Hey, I saw you on cable access," I've done my job here, right? And obviously we've done our job as, individuals sharing information. So as much as I can do to get the word out as possible.
What is the best way to get in contact with you generally?
Yeah, so calling the office is great. If I'm not in, feel free to leave a voicemail. I am a one-person office, so sometimes I am not in the office in the moment if I'm doing a house call and everything else. Thanks to our IT office, I've got a hotspot on my cell phone, so I've been able to, help a veteran with a disability claim in their driveway, and those kinds of things. So it's really allowed me to be flexible. Of course, that does sometimes mean the door is shut. Yeah, I'd certainly suggest giving my office a call, 617-972-6416, and, certainly we can have a discussion from there.
Excellent. Anything else that you want to add before we wrap up here?
No, I think that's it. I'm really just excited about, Veterans Day and sort of getting into this and talking to more veterans and talking to families and really hoping to equip some of our partners with more information. That way they can, have better discussions with veterans before they come to my office, and we can have a, serious discussion about what they're eligible for.
All right. Patrick George, Veteran Services Officer for the City of Watertown. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.